Well, welcome everybody. It's just gone 7 o'clock. It's the Club Soda webinar with Helen again. Gosh, the summer's gone really fast. I'm sure the last time I was here I was choking and weeping and wheezing with some kind of allergy or hay fever, and I could barely get through 45 minutes, for which I apologise. And I'm today talking about predominantly the end of, or getting towards the end of Sober October, or Go Sober for October. It's relevant now because many people are taking a month off, but also it can be relevant for anyone in the future or past who has taken a long period of time off alcohol, 4+ weeks, and then reflecting on what they want to do next with their drinking. And for some people that may be returning to drinking again, but in a slightly different way. It may be extending that month off to have another month or more off. Maybe just quitting for good because of what you discovered during that month about what it's like to not drink. So I suppose the main question to reflect on, if you are somebody who's taken a break from alcohol and you're coming to the end of that first self-imposed limit, the month off or whatever, and to reflect on, well, what were you trying to show yourself through doing that? Or what were you trying to achieve through having a month off? And it's different for different people. For some people it's a challenge. It's for charity maybe, or it's just something they're doing just to sort of push themselves. It may or may not be difficult for them to do, but they've sort of made a commitment to themselves that they're going to not drink for 1 month or another length of time. But for other people, what they wanted to show themselves or achieve through it may be different. So how do I feel when I don't drink? What are the benefits of not drinking? Do some of my problems go away when I stop drinking? Can I lose weight and get fitter? Can I achieve more of my goals when I'm not drinking? So something to share with me if you want to in the messages, and if this relates to you, could be the kinds of things you were trying to show yourself or achieve when you were having this month off, or when you have had time off in the past. So once you've identified, well, what was I hoping to achieve or show myself during the month, then reflect upon this. Did you show yourself that? Did you achieve it? If you did find that you were able to stick to a healthier diet when you weren't drinking, or stick to your exercise, or make progress with some of your other life goals, etc. when you weren't drinking, then what now? You've shown yourself that things maybe do improve. So what are you going to do about alcohol now? Now that you've learned that when you don't drink, certain things in life maybe get better. Because it's kind of perverse in a way, isn't it? Sometimes we discover something works, but then we stop doing that thing. And I see this time and time again in my practice privately and within sort of public sector services, is that people regularly do discover things that work for them. They maybe work for a week, they maybe work for a month, they maybe work for 6 months or more if they're going for long-term sort of sobriety. But yet, despite having learnt that or shown themselves that, they don't carry on doing it. And it's sort of, some people call it madness. It almost, why am I going back to something that I've already shown myself life's better without? And I've already learned what's better when I don't drink. For example, I know I have better relationships. I know I'm a healthier person. I know my opinion of myself is better when I don't drink than when I do, etc. So, what were you trying to show yourself or achieve by having a month off? Did you discover that what you hypothesised to be that would happen did happen, or did having the month off not achieve the things you were hoping for, or was it really hard, and was it something you don't want to put yourself through again? But I think for many people, they discover there are positive things to having a month off, or more time off. I don't think many people get to the 1st of November and go, oh God, I really regret not drinking during October. I really wish I'd never done that. It's the kind of thing people are pleased they did and proud of themselves for doing, and have no regrets for having done. So what will you do with alcohol now? Now, this comes up every year when we do the sort of dry January, sober October chat. And for many people, taking a month off is called kind of a reboot. I'm going to get alcohol out of my life for a month. I'm going to feel better and show myself that I can not drink for days and days and days on end. And then after that, hopefully there's been some kind of internal reboot whereby when I do start drinking alcohol again, it's going to be more occasional. I'm going to drink less on the days I do drink. I'm going to have more days off. I'm going to have certain rules around when I do and don't drink. For instance, I don't drink in the week. I don't drink alone. I only drink with meals, or any other kind of rules and boundaries that people put around their hoped for new drinking relationship. For many people, it is about returning to alcohol, but less of the time. Maybe it's within government guidelines or some other kind of number that would be something that you would be happy with. Again, the government guidelines are there because of what we know about risks and harms at that level. But other people who I work with regularly are happier with drinking more than the guidelines, but less than they currently are. So if you want to return to drinking again, then what are your new terms of that relationship? What boundaries are you putting in place around alcohol? So it happened, I think, 2 years ago. In fact, we even did a workshop, I think, with Club Soda about people's sort of return to drinking after their month off. And many people said, what I would ideally like to be the case is that I don't drink in the week unless it's like, a 50th or 40th, a huge thing. But mostly I don't, and I don't drink alone. And then the other question was, what are you going to do when the month's over? What are you going to do when you've done your month and shown yourself that you can do it? And many people said, well, I'm going to have a drink. Now, the 1st of February that year fell on something like a Wednesday, so they were already breaking one of their very first rules. They were celebrating finishing dry January by having a drink on the 1st of February, which was a Wednesday, even though they'd literally said, I don't want to drink in the week anymore. So I think, one needs to be very honest with oneself about those boundaries you're putting in place. Yes, I like to use alcohol to sort of socialise now and again, but I don't want to do it all the time. And then, stating the conditions under which you personally, individually, not what anyone else would say, you personally would be happy with, and then committing to not breaking those rules. Now, that could be something that's quite difficult for many people, because they like to have more flexibility. I don't want to commit to just drinking, at weekends, because often I don't do anything at weekends, but I do go out in the week. Well, that's fine, but you may need new boundaries, which are, I don't drink alone, I only drink 2 or 3 nights of the week, I don't only drink X amount of units total in a session or week, etc. It can be flexible, you can be as rigid as works for you. But the main thing is you don't keep removing your goalposts every week when you want to find essentially a new loophole under which you can drink that night. And somebody's just made a comment that, if you need to put rules in place for your drinking, then does that mean there's an issue? Well, it can do for people. And many people decide to just remain abstinent after a period of imposing these rules and boundaries, simply because it's just too much of a faff. They're constantly thinking about alcohol when they're not drinking. They're constantly planning their next drink and then monitoring their drinking when they're drinking. And that sort of takes away what was their pleasurable experience of alcohol, to the extent that they can't be bothered. Yeah, and that is the way some people go. But if you are going to let alcohol back into your life and have a relationship with it, then that needs boundaries, and then you need to stick to those boundaries and recognise when you are building in loopholes, just this once, etc. And some people, quite enjoy being quite disciplined around things. Some people quite like, self-monitoring and keeping a record, and they don't find that draining or or irritating, but other people do just sort of go, you know what, I'd rather just not drink. Thinking about this all the time is actually more of a drain. And I always sort of call it, it's a bit like with smoking. I gave up this 40 a day habit, and in a sense it's just easy to turn the switch to off. When the switch is on or off, it's just a binary decision. Would you like a cigarette? No, thank you, I don't smoke. Not, maybe, do I smoke today? Or shall I smoke tomorrow? And if I do smoke tomorrow, what brand and how many, etc. It's much easier when it's an off or an on. It's a binary decision. The switch is off. The decision is always no. The answer is always no, thank you. Much simpler for the brain to kind of process that kind of simple rule, if you like. Would you like a drink? No, thank you, I don't drink. If that's always your answer, in a sense, it's a simpler situation to be in for some people. Mentally, it's simpler. The brain's got less to do because the answer's always the same and becomes more habitual. When we introduce somebody's on day 6 of the ciggies, well done. When we introduce possibilities for moderation, we're actually introducing multiple, hundreds possibly in a month, if not week, hundreds of micro decisions around that behaviour. Will I drink? How much? With who? On what day? How will I know when I've had enough? How will I stop myself drinking more than I planned? How will I track my units? It's lots and lots and lots of decisions. It's a bit like eating. Even people with severe eating disorders have to still have a relationship with food, which means people who are in recovery from eating disorders have to, face multiple decisions around food 3 times a day at least, because they can't just not eat. And that's quite tricky behaviour for that reason, because there's multiple decisions around food and beverages that we make each day. So introducing the idea of moderation does introduce into your life the possibility of being confronted with multiple decisions, but possibly every day, around alcohol, which can be quite draining. Yes, in time, with repeated stock responses to those decisions, they can become habitual, but they're not going to be at first, which means they're effortful. They're not autopilot. They're the opposite of that, and that's effortful. So it's always worth giving it a go. If you've managed to have a month off and you want to give it a go, who am I to say returning to moderate drinking is an inappropriate goal? Because there's government guidelines around alcohol. It's a legal substance. People are even permitted by the government to enjoy 14 units of it a week. Wow. So for the time being, it's appropriate to want to get a bit intoxicated now and again by using alcohol, but whether that's an easy decision for you to make remains to be seen. So it's certainly something to think about. Is okay, well, I'm introducing alcohol back into my life, I think, even though it's been great not drinking for various reasons. I'd like to use alcohol now and again in a certain way. Well, what way? What are your boundaries? Be firm about them and commit to sticking to them. If you only want to drink at weekends, then if Marjorie from accounting's having a leaving do on Wednesday, then that's just still a non-drinking day. It doesn't mean you can't go. It means it's a non-drinking day because you've chosen to be very disciplined around your alcohol boundaries. If you're going to introduce flexibility and say, well, actually, Marjorie's, been working here for 150 years. I'm going to go. I'm going to have a couple of drinks with my colleagues and say goodbye. That means I'm not drinking on Friday night, which I'd been planning on doing. You can introduce flexibility if you can trust yourself. But again, it's about whether you discover that you can. I know lots of people have a units per week limit, and then what happens? Monday and Tuesday go by and they've had their weekly units almost mindlessly because they weren't special occasions, and then they're left kind of thinking like they can't drink at all for the rest of the week, even if they've got social events coming up at the weekend. So introduce flexibility only if you think that's going to work for you. And if you discover it doesn't, then that's, as I think Richard mentioned, that's something to then reflect upon again. Is this working for me? No. What have I shown myself now? I've shown myself that I can not drink for a month, but that moderation isn't really working for me in the way I'd like it to. There's still problems there. that I need to address. And I think there's something that comes up a lot again in lots of my work, is this notion that us psychologists will often refer to as magical thinking. It's like a cognitive distortion, if you like. And we often want to believe that for our particular problem there's a single, almost fail-safe solution. And we're always looking for that perfect solution to our problem. And we don't really like the kind of uncomfortable feeling that there could be multiple possible solutions to our problem. It's a bit like, people often want to find a medical explanation for, say, weight gain, or a medical cure for that, and to be told that a combination of lifestyle factors and small changes over time are also effective. People often don't like to hear that, and I meet many people over the course of a year in my public sector work who've heard about medications that can help people reduce or stop drinking. I don't mean alcohol detox, I mean other medications that are kind of more modern and have been shown in some trials that help people reduce a bit what they drink. One's called nalmefene or nalmefene, very hard to get in England. There's another one called naltrexone, which has also been used for people reducing to moderation, and other ones too. But people often hope that there's this one single solution that isn't about them making behavioural change. And actually, even medications are more effective when we're also making behavioural change. Antidepressants are more effective when we're also making lifestyle change that also, reduces our depression symptoms. An antidepressant alone doesn't do all the work. It's a combination of factors. It might be CBT, antidepressants, getting better sleep, better nutrition and exercising and getting out each day. Combination of factors are more likely to be effective than just one particularly pharmacological solution, or just one therapy. But there is some sort of somehow magical thinking that one can, say, have a month off or a year off or whatever off, and then you've kind of reset yourself to be like a naive drinker, and then when you start drinking again you'll have a choice about how much alcohol you want to drink, and not have such a sort of appetite for it that you had before. What I find over and over again is that that's not the case. I'll be delighted to be proved wrong, but once people have discovered that they like how this molecule makes them feel, then unlike other people who don't like how that molecule makes them feel, some people don't really like being drunk or out of control or dizzy. Some people find it not quite, hideously aversive, but not so pleasurable that it's something they're going to be, really interested in doing regularly. Whereas other people get really interested in alcohol. They like what it does. It's a rewarding thing. They want to do more of it. And that's very difficult to unlearn, the reward factor. So you could have a long reboot, and that doesn't mean that alcohol's any different for you in terms of how you used to enjoy it. And some people don't really like this analogy that I'm about to go into, but it's been quite effective in the past. So I describe it often, and not everyone here has necessarily had, a really hideous relationship with alcohol. Some people here alcohol may not have brought them a huge array of problems, but for lots of people it has. So imagine there are two people and it's an abusive relationship. I'm not putting any genders into this relationship. There's two people, one person is abusing the other person and has done for a very long time, and the person who's being abused keeps sort of staying in the relationship and sort of trying to change themselves, and then eventually they think that they realise finally that they need to get out of the relationship, and they do. They escape and they go away and they maybe get some therapy and they hang out with people who have healthy relationships or who have also escaped unhealthy ones and abusive ones. They do a lot of self-help. They really work on themselves. They learn about boundaries. They learn what they're worth. They understand what a healthy relationship would look like and how to sort of identify them, etc. They could go away for a month. They could go away for a year. and do all that work on themselves, and they have changed. That person has done a lot of work on themselves and they have changed. Now, would you imagine that person would go back into a relationship with their abuser, and suddenly that would be a good, positive relationship? Now, no, because the abuser hasn't done any work on themselves at all. They've just been sitting there that whole month or year or whatever, while the abused has been doing all the work on themselves, but the abuser's done no work on themselves. They've not changed. So going back into that relationship, whatever one knows about boundaries, the other person hasn't changed, and are likely to still be the same. And really, that's what I see alcohol as. We can go away and do an enormous amount of work on ourselves. We can get it out of our system. We can take a long break from it. We can reflect upon it in our lives and our relationship with it, and all that good stuff, and learn what life could be like and is like without it. So then when we go back and have a relationship with the alcohol again, well, the alcohol's not changed. We have, but it hasn't. And what it does for us is probably always going to be what it does for us, at least in a great amount of time that we're drinking. So it's something to bear in mind. If you keep entering into a relationship with alcohol, alcohol may always sort of have that hold over you. If it's had a hold over you in the past, because at some point in your life it served a purpose, it scratched an itch, it was pleasurable, it removed pain, or whatever, that's possibly always going to be a bit of a problematic relationship, in my view. Now, obviously, when you have underlying issues, you can address them through other means, through therapy, through lifestyle change, through healthier pursuits, etc. And that doesn't mean that you can't then go back to drinking, let's say, 14 units of alcohol a week in social situations with people you really like when you're feeling happy and positive, and it would bring you problems again. But there's a possible kind of vulnerability there, because of how you maybe used alcohol in the past. Some of my clients really hate me using the word use alcohol, because they think it's a drug-related word, drug user. Have you used today is something that one might say to somebody who uses drugs, particularly things like heroin or crack. But I would also say that most of the time people don't use alcohol to quench their thirst, even if they say they do. They're using alcohol to because of what that molecule does to their brain, and therefore how it helps them feel a bit different. So it's being used to feel a bit different, and that's why I use the word use, but I know it's a problematic word for other people. And alcohol is an intoxicant. It's a legal high, if you like. It's something that does get us intoxicated, but unlike other substances, we're allowed to get intoxicated with it. We don't have to surreptitiously, go in sort of back alleys and car parks to buy it, and worry if we're going to get caught with it in our possession, for example. But it is, a drug, really. It's a mind-altering substance. So usually people are using it for a reason, and if you're not addressing those underlying reasons, you have got a vulnerability there when you return to moderate drinking, or try to, that you may discover, I'm still using alcohol for maybe sleep, for loneliness, for boredom, for my anxiety, for my depression, etc. So do reflect on whether you need new coping strategies and support for some of your other issues. That's not to say that alcohol's always being used in a really sinister way to cover up underlying issues. Sometimes it's habit, and it's just something that people have grown up with. It's culturally something that they've done within their sort of family or work culture, and therefore habits aren't easier to break either, and that still requires quite a lot of effort on one's part to change habits. So I suppose the question is then, what are my underlying issues? Am I drinking to feel better about something that I don't feel good about? If so, what are those things? Sometimes we have discovered that through taking a month off, and I'm wondering if anyone who has taken a week or a month or more off alcohol, who's here now, has been in that situation where they have discovered, wow, without alcohol I feel X, or without alcohol I notice how something I am, and if as a result of that discovery you did something about it. So, without alcohol I didn't realise how stressed I am. Without alcohol I didn't realise how tired I am at the end of a day, or without alcohol I didn't realise how shy I was socially, because I think it's only when we take it away and we discover what we're like without it that we can begin to put sort of plans and strategies in place for essentially alternative solutions. And there's nothing wrong with being shy, is there? But sometimes we would rather not feel shy, and there's confidence that comes from alcohol. Sometimes we feel stressed, and alcohol is a quick way of unstressing at the end of the day. I mean, I was there when I was at my peak, which was when I was bereaved. It was just the quickest way to change how I was feeling and get a break from how I was feeling for a period of time. And that was a sort of bottle of wine a night for me at that point in time. So I was sort of putting pause on the problems. I wasn't curing the problems by any stretch of the imagination. I was putting pause on them so that I could get a bit of respite for a few hours in the evening, fall asleep without crying, and then how I felt was still there in the morning. Obviously it was worse also because I was in the situation of hangover, and what that does to the brain. So it's only when you stop drinking, and usually for a slightly extended period of time, that we discover, well, oh my gosh, these are my feelings. And it's a saying in the recovery kind of industry, but I quite like it, even though it's sort of said a lot, is that one of the great things about giving up alcohol is you get your feelings back, but one of the worst things about giving up alcohol is you get your feelings back. And we get all of our feelings, the full strength of all of our feelings, when we stop using something that we've been using to change how we feel. And that can be quite the roller coaster. I don't know what anyone on this webinar live who's maybe been doing Sober October or has done a month off in the past or is not drinking now, has to sort of suggest about that. Did they get positive and negative feelings when they first stopped drinking? Did they have more painful feelings that they needed to find another coping strategy for? It takes quite a lot of determination and quite a lot of application to the process of stopping drinking, if that's what the person wants, or certainly drinking less. It's quite a lot of a concerted effort, I think, to make sure we identify those things. Wow, I'm feeling so much more energy. Well, that's a great thing to recognise if you're in the process of, in the habit of doing things like gratitude journals or diaries or journaling generally, or just noting stuff. Noting the positives is great because we need to see that they're there and recognise them, but also noting that, wow, who knew I was, so shy or so angry or so stressed. Right, what am I going to do about it? Because the go-to solution for some people many years, for some people decades, is to drink a bit heavily, to black out, whatever. But that's many people's go-to solution for unpleasant feelings, and we're going to have to work hard to find other solutions for those, and they're not necessarily right on hand like alcohol is. Alcohol is something we can get our hands on pretty quick. If another solution is, a relaxation exercise to stress, we've got to be disciplined enough to do that relaxation exercise, or tape, showing my age, recording. We need to be disciplined to implement those other possible solutions. There's there's certainly more than one way of making sure we get to sleep. There's more than one way of relaxing at the end of a stressful day. There's more than one way of processing anger or helping ourselves feel more confident in a public space. There's numerous ways and techniques and skills and strategies and therapies and self-help books and TED Talks about many of those things, but we are the people who have to be disciplined enough to enact those other strategies, or at least try them out. We've tried out alcohol, we discovered it works to a certain extent to solve problem X. It may create a new problem Y, but it still solves problem X. And we need to then work hard to find other solutions for problem X. And the first thing we try might not work. Relaxation exercise might not work. Yoga might not work. Going to the gym might not work. But for some people, it might work. And therefore, it's worth trying different things out. Otherwise, without making that effort to try, well, we're not really working very hard at all. We're just going, oh, I'm feeling this, and I can't do anything about it, and now I'm not even allowed alcohol, so poor old me. There are other solutions out there. People who don't drink or have a problem with alcohol, have other solutions for some of their issues, and we need to commit to trying some of them out ourselves. And somebody's just posted here, well done, after being 10 weeks alcohol free, noticing a lot more emotion that would have been blocked out, but also thinking more clearly and relationship improvements. And I think that's great that there's the sort of two sides to this, much like there's two sides to alcohol, right? On the one hand, it's quite a convenient and instantaneous way to switch off at the end of the day. But on the other hand, it's, I'm losing my sharpness, I'm feeling unwell, I don't like myself so much, etc. Usually, most behaviours have positives and negatives, and I think it's really important that we recognise them both, because people can often... it often feels as though people are saying, oh, there's nothing good about alcohol now, I'm just going to knock it on the head, there's not one good thing. And obviously that's... when we feel like that is when we're often motivated to change, but we do need to sort of get into the nitty-gritty a bit more and go, yeah, but why am I doing it? We're rational creatures. We wouldn't do things that were completely and utterly appalling for us in every single way. That what's the thing we're getting from it? Because only then can we find other ways of getting that thing. And I think somebody else is just saying they've cut down on alcohol already and want to start with a dry 2 weeks. And I think a dry week and a dry 2 weeks are brilliant ways to start. A couple of dry 2 weeks a year is really good for the health anyway. And also trying new things and signing up for lots of stuff. I think the question in this comment here is, am I just creating more distraction for myself? It sometimes feels like I'm doing all this positive stuff, so I'm not at risk of drinking. Now, I wonder what other people think about that. I think that it would be great to think that we just come home from work or whatever, a busy day, and we just sort of naturally know ways to relax, and we naturally, can entertain ourselves and don't feel bored and don't feel lonely and don't really need to distract ourselves, because we just so, have so much self-control and inner peace and wisdom that we just simply don't want to reach for a drink. Well, I actually think it's better to keep ourselves busy, and if that's distraction, then that's great, because it's a technique that works. Distraction is a technique that works when people are having cravings and urges. It's one of the things from a cognitive behavioural perspective that we recommend people do, because what you have is a thought, which is a suggestion, it's not an order, right? Thoughts are just suggestions, they're not orders, but we often treat them like orders, and there's a thought and then there's an action, and we don't give that space to breathe and actually challenge that thought before we act. Now, distraction techniques, whether that's the gym, whether that's picking up the phone to someone, whether that's putting on a load of washing, I don't know, it's something, it means we've had a thought, but before we act upon the thought, we're going to distract ourselves, and then we have time also to sort of look at that thought from an outsider's perspective and go, okay, well, that thought that it would be really nice to have a drink, before I act on that, I'm just going to hang this washing out, or go to the gym, or go to this class, and see what happens to that thought later on, and give myself time to essentially talk myself out of it. So I think, although those things are all positive, and maybe you feel it's a little bit artificial to have so many, evening classes and things that you've signed up for, I actually think it's admirable that you're creating a sort of framework of distraction, particularly in the early days. Remember, you're trying to change habits of, like I say, years, if not decades for some people. Why on earth would it be that easy to change a habit that's formed over years? We need to make really strong, concerted efforts, and they need to be consistent and repeated in order for ourselves to change our habits of a lifetime, so that, a year from now, we might not need to have an evening class booked every single night of the week, right? In order to not drink. But that's a year from now. But we might need to have other commitments and plans and arrangements in place for the first 6 months or more to help us drink less or not drink at all. So I wouldn't worry yourself that it's not a real strategy because you're just distracting yourself from wanting to drink. I think that's an absolutely ideal strategy, particularly when, thoughts of wanting to drink can very quickly, if we let them linger, can very quickly become more like a felt craving. It's a thought. If you're not physically dependent on alcohol, like you have sweats and shakes and things, if you're not physically dependent on alcohol, then the thought that you maybe would like a drink, or a drink would be nice about now, is just a thought. But the more we kind of let it sit there, the more it almost shifts to being more of a bodily craving, and then it starts to feel like we're really craving it rather than we're just thinking a thought that could just blow through our mind if we distracted ourselves enough. The opposite of distraction is obviously a sort of, well, not opposite, but an alternative to distraction is obviously the sort of mindfulness-based approach, which is that we don't try and replace the thought with another thought. We just let the thought be there. We notice the thought. Oh, there I am, noticing myself thinking it would be nice to have a drink. Oh, well, there's that thought. But that thought isn't an action. It's not an order. I can just let that thought sit there. Or I can let a feeling sit there and not act upon it. Now, I'm not super into my whole mindfulness practice myself, although it's been integrated with cognitive behavioural therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive behavioural therapy, which I'm more au fait with. But I do also think that those kinds of mindfulness practices, as well as concrete behavioural distraction techniques, can both be really useful for managing these sort of thoughts and cravings and urges to have a drink, particularly in the early days. Because in the early days, I think you just need to throw the full arsenal at stuff for behaviour change. It really needs to be quite a concerted effort. Saying that, obviously, it can also feel quite draining and negative for some people to be thinking, why am I always thinking about not drinking? I'm thinking about what can I do to not drink? Oh, it's almost like you can't not think of alcohol, can you? So I think that it's like saying don't think of a pink elephant. Well, you kind of think of a pink elephant with a cross through it or something, but the pink elephant comes first. So to think about not drinking all the time can be sort of almost steering the mind to think about alcohol. And I agree that if everything's sort of couched in how can I not drink tonight, terms, it could be quite draining and not positive. And, the expression a dry drunk, which I don't particularly like, but that often comes from that sort of idea that somebody isn't drinking, but that's all that's different, is that they're just sort of white-knuckling it and not drinking, but other things in their life aren't positive or whatever. And there's certainly a sense of balance, and it's something I've said before on these webinars, and I'll say it again because the sort of image of it, it feels really powerful to me. and it's helped quite a lot of my sort of face-to-face clients who I work with in sort of the public sector. So when we're thinking about sort of pushing something out of our life, either completely or having certainly much less room for it in our life, something you can think about is just sort of almost filling yourself, your life, with other healthy, positive things. Now that might be looking at motivational YouTube things like TED Talks or mindfulness talks on YouTube. It could be signing up for classes or college. It could be, joining book clubs. It could be, going to the gym or going swimming, going for walks, reading positive literature, connecting with different people than you would normally connect with because you've got a shared interest or they seem like a sort of healthier person. And in a way, the way this client of mine once described it, she said, I'm just putting more and more in on top, and it's just pushing alcohol out to the bottom of my feet. So she wasn't concentrating on pushing alcohol out. She was more concentrating on nourishing herself with, positive experiences and information and influences, and almost by default that was pushing alcohol out her feet, pushing alcohol out of her life, because alcohol was just less compatible with those other things, and she was being less congruent when she was drinking with these sort of new things she was sort of inspiring herself with. And I really like that idea, because rather than thinking must not drink alcohol, must join a night class to keep myself busy or whatever, you're just putting things in, just filling yourself up with more positive experiences. And it could be from bubble baths to books that you've read before but you love reading, right through to things like college and new friendship groups and things like that, or sports teams. So I quite like that idea, because to tell people to not do something and not think about something, they tend to be thinking about it a lot, which can almost be harder. So think about sort of nourishing yourself with other things that are kind of incompatible with a drinking you, and see also how that works to push out the space that you have in your life and your mind for alcohol. Somebody here's asked, do I think it's important to try positive activities such as yoga, mindfulness, not just as a distraction, but to provide good habits going forward? Well, yeah, absolutely. Particularly if we get into those things and they become part of our sort of weekly structure, we can certainly try things to see if we like them, and that's great. Don't knock it till you've tried it, as they say. I went to a gong bath last year, and it was great. It's not something I'm going to be getting into. I'm not going to be going to the weekly gong bath at Buddha on a Bicycle, but other people do, because it's something they really like to have in their week. But I do listen to audio sort of relaxation recordings, which work for me, usually on a Friday when I've had a kind of quite a busy week. And when you do find things that you actually like and are beneficial, then by keeping them in a regular structure is building a healthy habit, isn't it? That's what I do on Fridays. On Fridays I go straight out, to my book club, or on Fridays I always go to the gym on my way back from work. And then when I get home, I cook a nice dinner and relax, and that becomes the new normal. Your new normal is that's what I do on Friday nights, or my new normal is on Tuesdays. I always leave work bang on the dot of 5, because then I get to my book club on time and, can have a really nice evening, and that becomes the new normal. It's the new structure, the new framework to your week. So certainly finding positive things to try is one thing. Particularly if you're having a month off, you can try all sorts of stuff in that month. You can try 5 rhythms dance, you can try a gong bath, you can try, swimming, you can have lessons in something, you can join the library and go to whatever they're doing down there. When you're taking a month off, you can almost just use it as an experiment in trying all sorts of new things. But eventually, hopefully, you'll find some specific things that are kind of you, and they're things that you consider would be a healthy, positive endeavour an activity for you to do on a regular basis and a commitment. So definitely we've got this sort of, there's distracting ourselves from drink, but also finding new positive things that make us feel positive inside, rather than often drinking, which might put the brakes on a stressful day or something. It doesn't make us feel positive inside permanently, or even necessarily at the time, and certainly not the next day. So most of these other activities, such as yoga or exercise, are often things that make us feel good about ourselves during and after them as well. So they have an extra level of benefit. So I certainly would be looking at generally helping yourself have a more enriching life if you've got those opportunities. Now, people often don't, because sometimes there's financial barriers to getting involved in lots of new things. But when you think about what you're spending on alcohol and think, well, how could I invest that in something else? That's one way of looking at it. If you spend £40 a week on alcohol from the supermarket, then that's my budget for doing sort of more positive stuff, whether it's by, getting an audiobook once a week and going swimming a couple of times a week and going to a book club, things that are relatively inexpensive, but you can afford within your kind of drink budget. That's something to also question yourself on, what you've got the possibilities to afford as well. I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts about their current month off, if they're in the midst of one, or previous breaks from alcohol and lessons learned from what they did after it. If anyone here has taken a bit of time off and returned to moderate drinking and how that went, then by all means dive in with some thoughts before we close. But I think to sort of recap, we've got, this webinar's been mostly about people who've taken a month off or 2 weeks off or 4 months off, whatever, a period of time off. What were you hoping to achieve through doing that? And what were you trying to prove to yourself when you did it? And that might be different for you all. And then, so that's what I hoped to achieve or thought I might achieve, or what I wanted out of it. Did I get that out of it? What did I learn? Did I achieve the things that I hoped to achieve through that? What were the positives and the negatives? What was challenging about having a month off? What was great about having a month off? And then on balance, looking at what was great about the month off and what was kind of hard about it, on balance, would you want to carry on doing that? Having more months off? If not, why not? Because, you need to ask yourself that as well. Although having a month off had lots of positive things for me, it was a bit hard, but on balance, the positives outweighed the negatives. Why do I want to return to occasional drinking? I'm not judging you. That's absolutely fine to do. But why do I want to? What do I want to get from alcohol by allowing it back into my life at the end of this month? What's it for now? Is it still to relax, or did I find other ways to relax during my month off so I don't really need alcohol anymore to relax? Or is it just because my social life was a bit challenging when I wasn't drinking? I'd like to still meet my mates a couple of times a week and have a drink, and I'd like to do that with alcohol, and that's absolutely fine. But tell yourself, be honest with yourself. So now I've shown myself what a month off's like, good and bad and indifferent. What do I want to do next? If it's return to moderate drinking, why? What do I still want to get out of using alcohol? And what are the boundaries I'm going to put around that use? Is it a certain amount of units a week, certain nights of the week, certain conditions such as never alone, never in the house, never in a bad mood? What are those boundaries? And then commit to those boundaries and commit to having some kind of flexibility. It may be, I don't mind if I change the day, change it to a weekday now and again for major birthdays and parties and milestones, but not for insignificant things like, just meeting a mate for a drink, and stick to those boundaries. Also reflect upon what's not changed about alcohol. If you've been using alcohol for certain purposes, to manage anxiety or to, you know, deal with a life that's really hard and whatever, then those underlying issues may well still be there after a month off. Yes, in the general population, we typically see an improvement in anxiety and depression symptoms about 3+ months when somebody stopped drinking. We typically see an improvement in the general population. But some people who have an underlying anxiety disorder or clinical depression, sort of bipolar type of situations or personality disorders, may not find that when they stop drinking things return to a more even keel, and there may be underlying issues there. And if there are, what am I going to do about those? What can I do? What's available to me? Do I need to speak to my GP, find a therapist, refer myself? In the UK you've got IAPT to refer to, etc. Because those underlying issues aren't going to go away, and it's up to you if you choose to find another source of coping with that, if not completely curing yourself of it, managing it without alcohol. And, you know, accepting that for you there may never be a reboot. Having a month or 3 or 6 months off may never reboot you to this sort of virgin state where you're somebody who's never used alcohol before, never tried a drink before, so now you're returning back to alcohol, and you can choose to just be a very, very occasional drinker. If you're somebody who has used it heavily for a variety of reasons, then it may not be as simple as just having a reboot. You may always need to tread with caution around your intake. And like somebody said, I think Richard said a lot earlier on, if you're constantly having to really monitor your intake and put a real effort into all of those boundaries around it, then maybe, you know, it could be worthwhile considering whether to take a lot longer off. Not least because it's in a way that's a simpler decision to make than to always be fighting and struggling with this sort of moderation that for some people it takes so much effort they'd rather not make that effort and just quit entirely, which is also a positive decision as well. I've really enjoyed talking to you this evening and meeting the new people here who I've seen some new names, and thank you for listening to me again. If you have any private questions, I don't use Facebook, but I'm on Messenger on Facebook, so you can messenger me. You can also contact me through Club Soda if you prefer to ask me a question privately, and I'll be happy to help if I can. I'm a psychologist. I work in sort of health behaviour change and addictions, and work in the public sector in a substance misuse service. So do come across a whole range of issues for people. So if anyone does want to just ping me any private questions, feel free to do so, and I'll do my best to help or forward you to organisation that can. And all that remains to be said is to have a lovely Sunday evening, and take care, everybody. Well done for all of the positive changes that you're making and or starting to make, and take care. All the best. Bye.